They train them to be stone, not quiet, not disciplined. Which stone? The kind that doesn't flinch at a drunk tourist screaming 6 inches from their face, doesn't blink when the flash photography turns the forecourt into a seizure of white light, doesn't so much as twitch when some journalist shoves a recorder towards their chest and asks, loud enough to embarrass God, whether they think the monarchy deserves to exist. Look, Stone, that's the whole job. Stand in the red coat and keep the rifle angled just so. Let the world perform its circus around you and give it nothing back. Not a word, not a look, certainly not an opinion. Plus, which is why, on a Tuesday morning in late October, overcast, the kind of cold that finds the gap between your collar and your jaw, when Sergeant Dominic Hale of the Household Cavalry took exactly 4 steps forward from his post outside the Sovereign's entrance, when turned to face the assembled press corps and foreign dignitaries gathered for the Commonwealth Address, and said into the silence, in a voice that carried across the entire forecourt like a bell struck against marble, "She's no right to that crown. None of you do." The world didn't know what to do with it. Neither did I. I was 30 feet away. I'd my notebook. I'd my press lanyard with the embarrassing photo and the slightly wrong spelling of my surname. John had a coffee going cold in my left hand. I'd absolutely no framework for what I was watching. Because the man, I guess, didn't run. Didn't shout again. Didn't drop his weapon or raise it. He simply stood there, bearskin still on, white gloves still perfectly fitted, and let the silence that followed eat everything else alive. In for what it's worth, 22 years of covering the royal beat, I'd watched a footman trip over a corgi at a state dinner. I'd watched a junior equerry accidentally address the King of Sweden as mate. I'd once, memorably, watched a chandelier lose a single crystal pendant directly onto the Foreign Secretary's shoulder during a toast, and the man not so much as blink. I'd never watched a royal guard break. I didn't understand yet that breaking wasn't what this was. This was something older, something that had been building behind that stone face for a very long time. Well, and by the time I understood what Dominic Hale was actually doing, by the time I understood what he knew, 3 people would be dead, 1 palace would be locked down, and I'd be sitting in a car outside a hospital in Kensington with blood on my notebook and the cold, nauseating certainty that the story I thought I was covering wasn't the story at all. The real story, honestly, had been standing at attention for months, waiting for someone to look at it directly. The press briefing was supposed to be 40 minutes, a Commonwealth address, a ribbon of scripted remarks from a junior aide, the usual parade of carefully orchestrated nothing, the kind of event you attend not because anything will happen, but because occasionally something does, and you want to be able to say you were there. I'd covered 17 of these in the last decade. I knew how they moved. I knew the rhythm of the forecourt, and the way the tourists backed up against the iron fence with their phones raised, the way the guards rotated with a mechanical precision that always made me feel vaguely like I was watching a very expensive clock. I knew what it looked like when nothing was wrong. The first thing I noticed about Hale was the stillness, not the performed stillness of the post, plus something underneath it. The kind of stillness that isn't absence of movement, it's suppression of it. Like watching a man hold a door shut from the inside. Every other guard on that forecourt was stone in the way they'd been trained. Passive, architectural, barely human. Hale was stone in a different way. Honestly, he was containing something. I wrote that in my notebook. One of the guards looks like he's holding his breath. I don't know why. Force of habit, maybe. Or some journalist instinct that operates below the level of conscious thought. Seed some animal thing that smells weather before the sky changes. The aide was TBH 3 sentences into his remarks when it happened. Look, 4 steps. Look, that was all. 4 steps forward and to the left. breaking from the post with the same measured precision he'd have used on a routine rotation, except the rotation was wrong. Wrong direction. Wrong time. No signal. I actually looked for the signal. I thought I'd missed something. Some procedural thing I didn't know about, on some ceremonial adjustment. My eyes swept the forecourt, looking for whoever was directing him. Nobody was directing him. He stopped, squared his shoulders, which the bearskin sat perfectly level on his head, the chin strap bisecting his jaw, his white gloves bright against the gray morning. The rifle was angled precisely at regulation. He looked, from any distance, exactly as he was supposed to look. Then he spoke, which the words themselves weren't loud. That was the thing that cut through everything, the absence of performance in them. TBH, no tremor, no rage, and just a man stating a fact he'd apparently been holding in his chest for long enough that it had worn a groove there. She's no right to that crown. Plus, none of you do. The aide stopped mid-sentence. I stopped mid-breath. The nearest protection officer, I clocked him immediately. Plainclothes, east side, hand already moving to his jacket. Stopped too, unblind, which was the more alarming thing, because protection officers are trained not to stop. They're trained to react, which the fact that he froze for a full 2 seconds meant the event had bypassed every category he had available to him. We all stood there in the October cold and did absolutely nothing. It was Hale who moved first. He didn't run. He didn't raise the rifle. Plus, he turned, smartly, mechanically, with the exact footwork of someone who drilled this movement 10,000 times, and walked back to his post, resumed position, eyes forward, with shoulders back, as if he'd said nothing, and as if the entire forecourt wasn't now vibrating at some frequency between confusion and terror. I got to him first. This is a thing I'm not entirely proud of, a thing I've turned over since, the way you turn a stone to find what's living under it. But I moved on instinct, and my instinct was journalist, and journalists move toward the thing everyone else is backing away from. I'd my recorder out before I'd consciously decided to use it. Sergeant. I didn't know his rank then. I found it later. I used it now because it felt right. Sergeant, what did you just... He looked at me. I want to be careful about what I say here, because I've spent a long time thinking about it, and I don't want to overdress it. He was in his late 30s, square jaw, on close cropped hair visible below the bearskin, a scar at the corner of his left eye, shaped like a parenthesis, pale and old. The kind of face that spent years doing exactly what it was told. What I saw in it wasn't madness. It wasn't grief, exactly. It wasn't ideology. I'd have recognized that. The hard brightness of it. The missionary quality. What I saw was fatigue. The specific, cellular exhaustion of someone who has been keeping a secret that is actively damaging them. The way a wound looks when it's been bandaged too long, and the bandage has become part of the problem. You were going to miss it, he said. Miss what? He didn't answer. His eyes moved back to the middle distance, and whatever door had opened in him closed again, smooth and immediate. The protection officers arrived behind me. One of them put a hand on my shoulder that was technically a grip, and I was moved backwards, with the professional courtesy of someone being relocated rather than removed. The forecourt dissolved into the choreography of a controlled incident. The aide was guided inside. The dignitaries were herded with practiced calm. The other guards held their posts with a rigidity that told me everything. They'd been briefed on something. Not this, maybe. You know. But something. I stood at the barrier and watched them take Dominic Hale off his post. He went without resistance. Plus, of course he did. He'd had no intention of resisting. That wasn't what any of this was. What I didn't know yet what I was still assembling from fragments in the back of my very alarmed mind, was that Hale had made 3 formal complaints in the previous 8 months through internal channels. 3. Each one TBH, routed upward through the correct procedures, and each one absorbed into the bureaucratic tissue of the household division like a stone dropped into deep water. No ripple, no response. This had been his 4th attempt, the less conventional one. Later, much later, sitting in the car outside Kensington Hospital with my cold coffee and my blood-spattered notebook, I'd find in my archive a photograph of Hale from a ceremonial parade 2 years prior. Immaculate, precise. The model of everything the uniform was meant to project. So in the background of that photograph, barely visible, half turned away from the camera, was a woman in a gray coat. I didn't know you know her name yet. Ide. They put him in a room, not a cell. The distinction was made twice, pointedly, by the duty officer who escorted me off the premises, and then, apparently regretting my expression, walked me as far as the side gate. He's in a consultation room, the man said. He has access to representation. As though the legal nicety was the reassurance I'd been looking for. I spent the next 4 hours in a coffee shop on Buckingham Gate, working my phone until my thumb ached. What I found wasn't a conspiracy theory, and that's the thing I keep coming back to. The detail that still feels like a nail in the wall, when everything else in this story has turned soft with interpretation. I wasn't looking for a conspiracy. I was looking for a disgruntled employee. I was looking for mental health records, a disciplinary history, some evidence of breakdown or grievance, the kind of paper trail that turns a dramatic public moment into a comprehensible human failure. Sort of, I found something tidier. Plus, and TBH, therefore more disturbing. His service record was clean. 21 years in the household cavalry. Commendations after the 2017 Manchester aftermath, sent when a trooper under his command had sustained an injury during a public order situation, and Hale had, by all accounts, held the line with a professionalism several senior officers had in particular noted. A Queen's Jubilee medal, handshake photograph from a function I couldn't identify, the date cropped. The complaints I found by accident. A source, look, I won't be more specific, and not for dramatic effect. And specificity here would end careers that don't deserve ending. Forwarded me a document that had been internally circulated within the division's welfare office. It was a summary of 3 separate submissions, all filed under formal grievance protocol. All attributed to a Sergeant D.R. Hale, Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. Each one concerned the same subject, a document. The nature of the document was described in the summary only obliquely, in the language of institutional caution. Like material of a sensitive constitutional nature, one phrase read, potentially classified correspondence pertaining to succession protocols, read another. The kind of language that is simultaneously precise and completely opaque, designed to both flag a concern and ensure that whoever receives the flag can credibly claim not to understand it. All 3 complaints had been marked, received, under review. None of them had been actioned. Had the 4th filing, the one he'd apparently decided to make in person in front of 40 journalists and a dozen foreign dignitaries on a Tuesday morning in October. That one wasn't in the document, because the document predated it. I basically sat in the coffee shop with my laptop and the dregs of my 3rd coffee and the specific low-level nausea of someone. Standing at the edge of something they can't fully see the bottom of, and I thought about the gray coat woman in the photograph. I went back to it, enlarged it on TBH, my screen until the pixels softened. Her face was half turned. She was looking at something to her left, not at the camera, not at Hale. She had a lanyard, visitors, not staff, and a folder under one arm. She was in her 50s, I thought. Or weathered 40s. The kind of face that was once striking and had since reorganized itself around some interior discipline. She wasn't anyone I knew. She was also very clearly watching Hale. Not the ceremony. Not the parade route, and him. I found her name 3 days later, and I'm going to tell you how, because the how matters. It wasn't a database search. It wasn't a source. It was a caption. An archived caption from a society photograph taken at a private function at Claridge's in 2019. So the kind of event that gets photographed by one of those interchangeable society photographers who always seem to be standing at the corner of every room where money and influence press their faces together and smile. Her sort of, name in the caption, Miriam Calder Banks. Her title, Constitutional Historian, formerly of the Cabinet Office. I wrote sort of it in my notebook and underlined it twice. Then I sat with it. Formerly of the Cabinet Office. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty, the kind that happens when a series of unrelated facts suddenly arrange themselves into a shape. I've felt it maybe 6 times in my career. It isn't triumphant. It is deeply uncomfortable. It feels like a door opening onto a room you weren't sure you wanted to enter. Hale had seen something, or been shown something, and a document, or a series of documents, went passed to him through a woman who had spent 20 years thinking professionally about the legal architecture of the British Crown, about succession, legitimacy, constitutional precedent, the places where ceremony and law didn't perfectly overlap. And in my opinion, whatever was in that document, he had believed it enough to file 3 formal complaints through institutional channels. And when those complaints had vanished into the machine, when he had stood on the forecourt at Buckingham Palace in his bearskin, his white gloves, with his rifle at regulation angle, and said it out loud, "She's no right to that crown." I want to be very careful here, and I mean careful in the honest sense, not the legal sense, though the legal sense applies too. I am not a constitutional scholar. I don't know what was in those documents. I don't, know whether what Hale believed was accurate, misrepresented to him, or something else entirely. And I've, only the shape of events and the behavior of a man who had nothing obviously to gain from what he did. That last part is what I keep returning to. The TBH, ones who fabricate, who perform, who engineer their own dramatic exits. They gain something. Attention. A platform, and a narrative they've constructed. They have a book deal in mind, or a solicitor waiting, or a podcast that'll drop the day after. Hale had none of that. When I mean they took him off that post, he went quietly. No statement. No prepared remarks. No eye contact with the cameras that swung toward him like sunflowers toward light. He'd said the one thing, which the specific, spare, devastating thing. And then he'd stood back at attention. As though, having finally said it, the standing at attention was the only dignity left available to him. I don't know, why that detail won't leave me alone. I don't know why, every time I try to write around it, I end up writing back to it. A man standing at attention in a room he'd just blown open, waiting for someone to take him seriously. Miriam Calder Banks was dead by Friday. I want to write that sentence again in a different way, to find the phrasing that makes it feel the correct size, neither inflated nor minimized. I can't. Plus, the sentence is what it's. The size of it's something the sentence can't contain. Found at her home in Islington. A fall, the initial report said. The stairs. A woman in her late 50s, who had perhaps been working late, who had perhaps been tired, who had perhaps simply missed a step in a house, that her neighbors described as full of books and papers, floor to ceiling in every room she'd ever let anyone see into. Actually, a fall. I stared at my screen for a very long time. I hadn't spoken to Miriam Calder Banks. I'd found her name in a caption. I'd spent 2 days trying to reach her through every channel available to someone with my level of access and my particular set of contacts in constitutional law circles. And the answer had been, uniformly, a silence that felt intentional. The kind of silence that is an answer dressed in absence. I guess she'd had a phone. She'd had email. She'd had 2 adult children whose social media I'd examined with the guilty thoroughness of a journalist doing what journalists do. She had never replied, and now she was dead on her stairs. I thought about the folder she'd been carrying in the photograph. The lanyard, the way she'd been watching Hale not as a stranger, watches someone, but as a person watches something they've set in motion. I called my editor. I told him I needed more time. He asked how much more time. I told him I didn't know. He said that wasn't how journalism worked. I said I was aware. There was a pause in which we both understood that we were having a different argument than the surface one, and then he told me to file what I'd by Monday, and we'd discuss the rest. I thanked him with a warmth I didn't feel, and hung up and sat in my car outside my flat, and didn't move for approximately 20 minutes. The blood on my notebook. I should explain that. 2 days before Miriam's death, I'd driven to Kensington. Not the palace. A private hospital, and the kind that doesn't appear prominently on maps, and whose name I won't print here for reasons that are both legal and personal. A source had told me that a junior member of the household division's welfare staff, not Hale, someone adjacent to his case, had been admitted following what the hospital's public-facing office described as a medical episode. I'd waited outside in my car for 3 hours. Look, standard patients. The coffee was from a place across the road that charged an amount for an Americano that I still find offensive. When the man came out, he wasn't who I'd been told to expect. He was younger. Actually, early 30s. Still in civilian, you know. Clothes from whatever he'd been doing, when whatever had happened to him had happened. He had a bandage on his left forearm, neat and clinical, and the look of someone whose equilibrium had been forcibly relocated. He saw me. Stopped. Plus, I'll tell you that I didn't approach him. I tell you this isn't as self-congratulation, but because it matters to the sequence. He approached me. He sat in the passenger seat of my car without asking. He stared through the windscreen. He said, "She didn't give it to him." I waited. Calderbanks. Plus, she didn't give Hale the document. She told him what was in it. He paused. There's a difference. There's a difference, and a document can be seized, suppressed, made to vanish. An account of basically a document, a thing told rather than held, lives inside a person. I guess harder to recover, impossible to fully destroy unless you destroy the person. I looked at his bandaged arm, and he noticed me looking. "I slipped," he said, in a tone that didn't suggest slipping. I asked him what the document was. He looked at me for the first time directly. His eyes were the gray of old dishwater, rimmed red at the edges, and in them was the specific quality of someone who has been told by their own nervous system that the world they understood has been structurally altered. "Have you ever looked," he said, "at the actual legal requirements for the letters patent? The original ones, the 1917 ones?" I said I didn't, which Hale did, he said. Calderbanks walked him through them. He got out of the car. I put my hand on the door, instinct, not intention, and the edge of the document wallet I'd been holding caught on the seat and split. So that's where the blood came from. A paper cut. Long and absurdly painful, the way paper cuts always are, disproportionate to their size. I watched him walk away. I pressed my palm against the notebook until the bleeding slowed. Here is what I know, as of the writing of this account. Dominic Hale has been released from the consultation room. He hasn't been charged. He has been, for what it's worth, suspended from duty pending a formal review. His union representation has described the situation, in the measured language of official statements, as complex and ongoing. Miriam Calder-Banks's death has been confirmed as accidental. The 3 formal complaints Hale filed have not been publicly acknowledged. The document, if it exists in written form anywhere, hasn't surfaced. The young man from the hospital hasn't contacted me again. I've tried twice. The number no longer connects. Here is what I believe, one understanding that belief and knowledge are different things, and that I've only one of them. Dominic Hale stood on that forecourt, not because he was unhinged, not because he was performing, not because he had anything left to lose. He stood there because he had exhausted every other option available to him, and had decided that the only institution he had left to appeal to was the one watching through telephoto lenses from behind the iron fence. The public. The audience. Us. And he put his faith in the idea that if he said it, plainly, precisely, in the voice he'd been trained to make stone, someone would pick it up. I'm writing this down. I don't know if that counts. I've a photograph of a woman in a gray coat watching a man at attention. The woman is dead. The man is suspended. The photograph is still in my archive, and in the background, barely visible, the edge of the folder under her arm. I keep looking at it. I keep looking at what's just barely visible. What might be text on the edge of a page, what might be nothing, what might be the specific 4 words that a man decided were worth.